Hi, everybody, and welcome to this month's Outdoor Ethics and Conservation Frequently Asked Questions. This month, I'm going to talk about what qualifies as a conservation-related service project. So what is the backstory here? Well, one of our dedicated scouting volunteers who serves as his Conservation Committee chair in his council sent me a query about a scout who does a bike patrol at a local wildlife and nature preserve. Reserve has patrol groups on foot, bike, and horseback. They patrol the preserve, checking in with the visitors for safety, compliance, understanding of the rules, to identify trail maintenance, and to update groups on wildlife sightings. The Conservation Committee would consider and accept this as a Scout Conservation Service hours. The Scoutmaster, however, does not. He wants the Scout to do some physical, more traditional type of service project like trail maintenance or the removal of invasive species. So what is acceptable BSA conservation service is the query. To begin with, I'd like to point you toward an Aaron on Scouting article that was published back in June of last year. Does picking up trash constitute conservation? And Aaron writes a nice article with expert help from Brian Gray, and they talk about conservation and conservation projects. So there's a good resource that might help inform your decision making here. Specifically, what this involves is the Life Scout requirement, number 4. Now, it says number 1 on the sheet, but it's actually number 4. While a Star Scout, participate in 6 hours of service through one or more service projects approved by your Scoutmaster. At least 3 hours of this service must be conservation related. So let's take a minute and dissect this requirement a bit to see where it takes us. So number 1, it's participate. So it is not give leadership to or organize and run a service project. It is a requirement that the Scout participates in 6 hours of service. Next thing I'd like to highlight is it does say through one or more service projects. Why that's important is there's a difference between a project and service. So a project is something that is temporary. It results in a new or modified or retired good or service. In other words, projects result in the modification of something existing or the creation of something new. A project defines a boundary that includes the resources and capabilities required to achieve the project and deliver the desired results. A service, on the other hand, delivers some value to the organization to achieve outcomes while removing the ownership of specific costs and risk. Thus, the service always has an operational aspect. A key difference between a service project and service. Next thing I want to highlight is it says here, approved by your Scoutmaster. This language makes it very clear that the Scoutmaster is empowered to determine what projects are appropriate for each Scout in order to fulfill the requirement. The Scoutmaster is uniquely positioned to make this determination based on the Scout's capabilities and the personal growth goals. Scouting volunteers outside of the unit should not dictate to Scoutmasters how they must interpret this requirement. However, a little education can go a long way, specifically at roundtables or training events that, could help Scoutmasters who are struggling to understand the requirement's intent. The last one I want to point out is it does say conservation related. Conservation related can mean a number of other things. So let's define conservation first. National Geographic came up with this determination that it is an act of protecting Earth's natural resources for current and future generations. Service projects that relate to the goal of protecting Earth's natural resources should also be considered. Some good resources in trying to define conservation projects are the Conservation Good Turn Award, the Conservation Handbook, and the Distinguished Conservation Service Award. Their information can all be found on the scouting.org website under outdoor programs, and you'll see the link to conservation and the environment. The brand new conservation handbook is due to be out soon. At the moment, it is out of print and it has been updated. We are just waiting for its release. So back to our story. A couple of things that I want to point out here. The Scout does a bike patrol, which is a service for the nature preserve or the wildlife preserve. So it is not necessarily a project. I think that's a key difference here and would help us in providing some guidance. However, that being said, it's possible that that Scoutmaster could be convinced of the value of the Scouts service. So what was my response? Well, I informed our volunteer that the BSA has no stated policy on what constitutes a conservation-related service project. I recommended that the Scout attempt to resolve the issue by convincing the Scoutmaster that the service is conservation-related, suggesting that the Scout compose a detailed argument on how the service on a bike patrol for a wildlife preserve is indeed helping to protect a precious natural resource, and thus should qualify as conservation-related. But I will reiterate that it is not necessarily a project. And then I asked that if the Scout is not successful in gaining the approval, the Scout should cheerfully work on conservation-related projects that satisfy the Scoutmaster's criteria. And then lastly, I just wanted to try to emphasize that the Council Conservation Committee would not typically put themselves in the position of interfering with a unit leader's decision-making on this issue. So what is the takeaway? Well, Scoutmasters determine what is a conservation-related service project. And conservation-related implies that we should expand our thinking to include projects that support an organization's work to preserve and protect the natural areas. So it may not be removing an invasive species or installing a water bar. It might be helping with signage or helping to clean an area, whatever that supports those organizational goals would be a conservation-related project. And there's a difference between service and a service project. That's all I have for you today. Unfortunately, I am not on the call. I had to record this in advance because I have a conflict tonight. But thank you for all you do to support outdoor ethics and conservation and scouting. And if you have any questions, the members of the committee on the call, I'm sure will be able to help you. Good luck and good scouting. Thank you. Bye-bye.